Hello, Maria. How are you today?
Hello. Hello, Giotto. I'm fine. Yeah, and you?
I'm good. I'm good. So today we
Good.
talk about trauma in the context of enlightenment. So I remember
Yeah,
you telling me that some people they have issues to break certain fetters
yeah,
because of some unresolved trauma. Now, in my specific case, I do not believe I have any trauma, so I've never encountered this issue.
right. Yeah.
But now that I went through all the fetters, and I kind of have a different perspective because it's the perspective before you reach is completely different from the perspective after you reach. I still
Hmm.
cannot really understand why the trauma will be a blocking event, will be something that
Okay.
will prevent the the success or will prevent in any way the realization. So maybe you can elaborate
Mm-hmm.
that, and maybe we can also
Yeah.
discuss which fetters in
Yeah.
particular are being affected and why.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a good point as well. Because yeah, I mean, I would just start by saying that it doesn't actually necessarily prevent people going through the fetters, but it can work as a kind of stumbling block for some people, or if not a stumbling block as such, a kind of an interruption or eruption into their inquiry, which is actually into illusions, but it can stir up old trauma for some people.
So
Um,
wait. So it's not that the trauma is preventing, but it's more that the
no,
realization, the breaking of the feather is making the trauma arise. So the trauma was hidden and it kind of suddenly erupt.
that can happen. Yeah, for sure. I'll hopefully be able to explain a bit why I think that happens.
Hmm.
Um, but it does seem to actually come up sometimes as a surprise for people. Speaking personally, um, I had actually had some trauma in my childhood, but I thought I had addressed it all before embarking on the fetters, because I had had years of therapy, and I'd actually trained in therapy, so I'd been required to stay in therapy and have supervision. So I thought I knew all these areas and I knew the content of whatever had happened very well, and I did in a sense conceptually. But I think what can happen as part of the fetters inquiry is that trauma can kind of erupt on a more visceral level, like you're reliving. Yeah.
So you
Um,
were already aware of this trauma. It was not news, and you believe
no.
that you had overcome it fully,
Yes. Yes, I
but then
did
it turned out you
actually.
did not when you started with
Yes.
the feather. Okay.
Yeah, and I've noticed, well, I've heard people and noticed in guiding people that it's similar for other people as well. So there is something about the unfettering process which can, it's a bit of a health warning that I do give actually before embarking on an inquiry with someone. I hope I did it. I don't remember if we did it, but yeah, I normally do a sort of health warning and explain that at some point this might come up. Are you happy? Are you okay with that? Um, and yeah, I've never known someone actually say, "Well, no," but then sometimes they don't know what they don't expect it, so they don't think it's going to happen to them, right? And it doesn't happen to everybody. Not everybody has unresolved trauma or PTSD
Yeah.
type stuff like yourself. Um, so yeah, I mean, trauma can make an appearance at almost any point when doing this. It is a deep inquiry into your experience. But as guides, we've noticed a bit of a pattern, which is that trauma most often arises when inquiring into two different illusions. The first one is reactivity, uh, fetters four and
Which will be
five,
which feather, like 4 and 5?
4 and 5, yeah. And later, also, when dropping the last proper illusion, which is fetter 8 or I am.
Mm,
Um, so maybe I could try and explain why I think it comes up at these particular junctures,
mm.
if you want,
Yes, let's see
yeah.
that. Of course, of course.
Well, I think excuse me, I had a cold. In the reactivity inquiry, you are focusing on using examples of how life didn't go your way or doesn't go your way as the focus of the inquiry. And this really can highlight uncomfortable experience or discomfort for people. It's
Because
not an
maybe
easy
people try to
inquiry.
go for the most extreme one. So in which case it was the most extreme that it didn't go the way you wanted, and that may very well be the
Yeah.
traumatic experience?
It can be that, or it can just be looking into just, I think it's not an easy inquiry, even if for people with little or no trauma, because it's focusing on an area where normally we want to avoid those sensations or the typical reactions that we get when, we have that particular stimulus. So if you've got even just a strong habit of avoiding how you feel, it can
Mm.
be it
Ah,
can
so you
be
mean that
uncomfortable.
the trauma
Yeah.
most likely was not resolved, it was kind of just put aside, and
Kind of, yeah.
by using it kind of as an example, as a way to look into the possibility of, okay, it couldn't have gone any other way, like determinism, free will, blah blah blah. It
Yeah.
kind of forces you to relive, to reimagine the trauma which you have not fully resolved. It's so maybe you're just hidden like under the rug, and now you have to kind of take it out.
Something like that. It seems to come out from under the rug, that's for sure. So yeah. Um, and what happens is, yeah, I mean, the inquiry, as you know, is looking between first dart pain and second dart suffering. So
Yes.
it doesn't actually have to be that particular first start pain and secondary suffering. It can be, just because you're looking carefully and you see there is no link or trigger between the two things, it's illusory. And we've just made this assumption that we have this necessity to react or regulate against unpleasant sensations when things don't go our way. But from a fetters point of view, that trigger isn't actually there. Um, but this can get confusing for people sometimes, because when trauma material comes up, it's it's actually survival mechanisms you built up or defended yourself against, maybe when you were very young. And these can appear to be or feel very similar to reactivity, but
Sorry, let
actually
me
are.
just add something, just so
Yeah,
because if
sure,
not, I
sure.
will forget. And then, so it does. Would it make sense to say that, let's say, for example, as a child, when you're defenseless and you're a victim of the trauma, you may build a story for yourself because that story allows you to cope with the situation. Let's say, I don't know, you are being abused in a violent way by your parents. So
Yeah.
now, because this is a very, you have no way out, you're maybe a young child, those are your parents, you cannot change them. And it's just so tough to accept that
Hmm.
reality that maybe you will tell yourself a story saying, I don't know, they are hitting me for my own good because I'm a bad child, or they are hitting me because they
Yeah.
love me. So you kind of build a story that you force
Yeah.
yourself to convince that it's true because it actually lower the pain. And then maybe when you
y-
go through the further process, you have to then remove this story, but that story was like a shell, like a
Yeah.
shield against that pain, and suddenly all that pain is released because you realize that it was all bullshit, that maybe your parents were terrible
Yeah.
parents and they hit you
Right.
because they were assholes and not because they love
Right.
you.
Yes, that's that kind of thing. I mean, whatever defenses you built up, yeah,
So this
against
this
just
defense is a story basically. So sometimes a story.
well, I think it's a bit of both. I think it is an intellectual compartmentalization that can go on, or a story, or it can be that people just really don't feel what they feel. They've learned to keep a lid on it.
Ah, so they have learned to repress the feeling basically because it was so
Repress.
painful that they
Yeah,
trained themselves to repress the feeling.
more that really. Yeah, and so actually, uh, you can be getting emotional flashbacks when you start and taking the lid off that. You can get flashbacks, and this can be a genuine trigger, of past material, which is entering the present, but in a very visceral way. So it's as if you're reliving um, the experience. For example, you might notice you have a feeling of fear come up, or you get a disproportionate response to a simple thing, like say, you realize that whenever you say no to somebody, um, when you don't want to do something, it brings up a kind of what feels like a reaction, but it's actually um, more like a PTSD thing where you've got to
Yeah.
fight, flight, you know the fight, flight, freeze or fawn
Yes.
reactions. Well, that can be sometimes, people's reactions can be to please everybody, to be very fawning, to be very agreeable. And they might realize, well, actually, no, I actually want to say no to this, but it's scary. And that can be not because you're reacting as, from a fetters point of view, creating mental stories, as you might put it, um, but because it was very dangerous for you at some point in your life, maybe to say no to your parents, for
Yeah,
example,
it's
or,
kind of a
you know,
conditioning, like a mental
yeah,
conditioning, but that could very well have been useful at the time. So let's say, yes, your
oh,
parents
yeah,
are extremely violent. So every
yeah,
time they say something, you have to say yes. You can never say no, or they will hit you. And you just
exactly.
learn that it's valuable, it's good to always agree. And then, yes, maybe later on you may intellectually understand that it's not good, but you're so conditioned that you may feel still some kind of fear or some kind of emotion when you're
Yeah,
about to say no, which even if you realize it doesn't make sense, you still can feel it as a conditionment, like just like an anchoring process is called, like
yeah,
Pavlov
yeah.
dogs. I don't know if you know Pavlov dogs. It's
I
like,
do, yeah.
so yeah, it
I do,
can
yeah.
just remain as a condition. You may fully understand that it doesn't make any sense, but it may still remain as a conditioning.
Yeah. That's it. That's it. It's when and sometimes it can be tricky to untangle for people, what is trauma conditioning, like Pavlov dog type of conditioning, which is often um, very visceral. You feel it. And reactivity, which can be more yeah, well, basically, when trauma is being relived, you don't want to question the trigger like you do with the inquiry into reactivity, because it's actually more like a trigger mechanism. It's like the danger has passed, your violent parent is no longer present, but you're now experiencing it as if that danger is still alive in the present, right?
Yes,
Um,
your memory
it's
is kind of playing games, so you are unconsciously confusing the past with the present.
Yeah, yeah. It's like the past cannot be consigned to the past because it's still being activated all the time in the present moment for that person. And so for that person, you would definitely, if you come across that kind of material, you don't want to inquire into it in a in a typical desire and ill will way. You might need a break to at least feel your feelings more, what those particular feelings out. You might need a bit of therapy to help you um
So how would you do it differently? So for someone
deal
that
with.
has trauma and someone versus someone who doesn't have trauma, or let's say feather 4 and 5.
Yeah, I would try to help the person distinguish between the two. What is a reaction in the classical sense, if you like, of
So the reaction is the
just
judgment. So it's like it shouldn't have been like this. So because you are working on the judgment part.
it isn't just judgment. It is that the illusion really is that you must regulate if you have first start unpleasant sensations, which you do when something happens you don't want to happen, or somebody says something you don't want, or somebody doesn't say something you do want. All those things that life doesn't go your way. It's not just a story that you tell yourself, but it's like you don't like how you feel. It doesn't feel good. But you have this illusion that you've got to react, you've got to
You've
kind of
got to
make
do
it better.
something basically.
You've got to do something about it.
So you think
And
this is a little bit broader than judgment? It's more like you have. Well, to me, it seems kind of like judgment. Is that even in judgment in a very broad sense? So you do not
right.
accept it. You have to do something. But yeah, sure, we can say the desire to do something. So that will be part of the process of the unfettering process.
Yes, it would. You're looking for a link up. You're looking for a real link between the fact that something doesn't feel pleasant and the fact that this feeling of you must react, right? That it's um, like a inevitability that you react. And you're looking for most people feel there is a live link between the two. And like if you have the unpleasant sensations, you've got to do something about it. So it's not even
Mm.
the stories are usually part of the reaction itself. You start building a mental. in Buddhist terms, I guess, proliferation of emotion, mental
Yeah.
content. You say, well, yeah, he didn't say hello to me, and that's because he's an unfriendly bastard, or it's because I'm not worthy of being paid
Yeah, it
attention
could
to, or
be what's called
whatever
like a chain.
story.
It
Yeah,
could be like a chain reaction. So it's like, let's say you say, "Oh, he didn't say hello to me. That means he hates me. Oh, he
yeah,
hates me. What an
yeah,
asshole. Oh, I really
yeah,
hate him." So it starts with a small trigger that has to be in
yeah,
reality, I guess. But then you can build a
yeah.
chain reaction of stories and judgment, which will trigger eventually the another first dart, which could then trigger another second dart, which can trigger another first dart, etc., etc.
Well, yeah, well, do second, third, fourth, fifth darts, I mean, you can carry on. Once you're into a reaction, you can carry on almost
Yeah.
infinitely in any direction, really. But I think this is looking before the reaction of the story that you build up, which is the story. The deeper illusory story is that there is an actual trigger for that reaction. You must, whenever you feel this particular set of sensations, let's say it's in the throat or the chest or wherever, you have to go into this story making, right?
Yes. Yes.
Whereas when you have a traumatic flashback, it's more like, you know, um, uh, yeah, for example, say somebody is raising their voice in another room, they're just speaking loudly and whatever. But say you've got some kind of trauma trigger about being shouted at or something like that. You would experience it on a very, you maybe start physically shaking. You might have a sort of
Mm.
visceral reaction, like your life is a bit threatened. Um, and you might realize mentally that it's completely disproportionate. They're not even shouting at you, they're shouting uh, for happiness at the football, or they're shouting at, uh, I don't know, make it up.
So
But
this is actually deeper than the reaction.
it's well, I'd say it's a different order of reaction. I wouldn't even call it a reaction in the
No, no, but I mean
in the
what
Fed.
triggers it, so or the way it operates,
Oh,
because it's like it's deeper. It's like, let's say you hear that loud voice in the other room and you start
mm,
shaking. This is
mm,
it all happens completely at the unconscious level. There is no thought, there is no judgment, there is not even
no,
a reaction. So it's like
no,
it's almost like part, like it's like super deep. It's like in purely in your unconscious. So it's like you hear that sound
yeah,
and you start shaking. So it's just
yeah,
we could call it maybe an automation, like almost an automated process, which kind
yeah,
of bypass your brain or at least your
yeah,
consciousness. So it goes
yep,
straight to your body, like from your ear, the sound enters in
yeah,
your ear and your body starts shaking. And maybe you're like,
yeah,
what's going on? And still it's shaking. So it's stronger
yeah,
than you, basically. It
yes.
bypasses. It bypasses
If
your
I
rational brain completely.
That's right. Yes, it is. And it's not you trying to avoid a particular stimulus, it's you being really affected by a particular stimulus because in the past you did experience some stimulus that was experienced as, very threatening to your well-being, to your even your life. And so you hear this thing, which acts like a trigger in the present, and it takes you right back to your experience when you
Yeah,
were,
because it connects you to the previous experience. So that experience is very
yeah,
strong because it probably has a strong
yeah.
emotional grasp on you. So it immediately bring you back and you relive that experience.
Yeah, and there's lots of physical therapists that say things like, I mean, there's even a book called it, The Body Holds the Score. The body
Mm.
kind of can retain these kind of traumatic experiences long after the danger has passed, or the events have passed. And
And I guess you may
um,
even have forgotten about it, but still the
yeah,
emotional element will stay.
yeah, or somewhere locked in the system is a memory of that, and it will need. In this case, it's something that really does need attention. It's not like you're trying to. Um, well, you don't bypass any of the reactions either when you're doing the fetters inquiry, but it's really important not to bypass it. Whatever you're feeling when you're dealing with trauma, because you might actually need help to. You know, because usually what happened when you're in those dangerous situations as a child is or say it was a war situation, it might not be when you were a child or some other event in your life, but whatever, you didn't have the ability um, to bear with your feelings in that moment. You know, nobody was being sympathetic to you being frightened. You know, can you imagine some people, like some children might have been so frightened that they wet the bed, and then they actually
Yes.
get spanked because they wet the bed, you know, because it's like a double insult to injury
Yeah,
kind
yeah,
of,
yeah, yeah.
you know, so they're conditioned to not be sympathetic as part of it to their own, however that feels. And so it's really important to, if someone clearly gets a trauma response come up as part of the fetters inquiry, I'll often suggest, I mean, I can give some pointers that they can try themselves to, you know, to be with that experience a bit more deeply, and maybe it'll pass, you know, through. It doesn't have to be that they have to have years of therapy or something. And often people who've broken the first three fetters have already loosened a lot of their identity. So it's interesting how, if you go into therapy as part of the fetters process, it's often not a very long, or you don't have to do a long, heady therapy. You could quite often just do a bit of body therapy, you know, like
Mm.
shaking. TRE is very good. Somatic experiencing of any kind, any of those type of therapies, because they can just help clear, you know, from the system. And you know, you do get to look at what the actual trigger was in your past and relive it to some degree, but then you relive it, and then once you've worked with it effectively, it should be consigned properly to the past. So, you know, when you get this stimulus in the present, you're no longer reacting as if it's still there. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes. I
Yeah.
think maybe it's a little bit similar to that thing. I don't know if you heard, it's called like the Stockholm syndrome. And it's like when basically people have been
Right.
captured by someone, let's say kidnapped, they
Yeah.
eventually form like a bond with their captor as if they kind of love them or
Yeah.
whatever. And now that I think
Ooh.
about it, it actually makes sense because it may very well increase their chances of survival. So they end
Yeah.
up
Yeah.
building a story that maybe after all, their captors don't hate them that much. Actually, maybe they love them or they have no choice in the matter. But they may build a story that they end up fully believing that the captor is not that bad because this maybe will result in them behaving nicer, and this will increase their chance of survival. And then, of course, when they
Yeah.
get released, basically, it's kind of, I understand now because I never really understood the
Mm.
implications of trauma, I think. And so trauma is like a
Mhm.
bad event happens to you, I mean, or at least a difficult event happens to you, and you kind
Mhm.
of build a story. You kind of try to reinterpret in a different way. You build a story to change the meaning it has to you, to soften its strength, to make it weaker, to make it less painful. So you build this story which acts as a
Yeah.
shield to reduce the pain. But then
Yeah.
after, when it's over, the story stays, and the story is most likely bullshit, because in that case, that
Right.
captor was certainly not doing you any favors, or your
Right.
parents were not hitting you because they loved you. But they, like, for
No.
example, I think there are cases. I mean, I'm not sure. Maybe I'm making it up. I'm not a psychologist, so I'm just stating my opinion. But I think there are many cases where, let's say, for example, someone. I'm just guessing here, yeah. But maybe this could be interesting. Well, for you, for me, or for people that listen. So maybe, let's say, some children, let's say, that has been raped by a parent, like they have been victim of
Mm.
rape as a child.
Mhm.
So this is such a difficult experience that maybe
Yeah.
unconsciously they tell themselves that actually it's a form of love, and the parents do it because they love them, because they cannot accept that the parent doesn't care and it's just selfish, let's say. And so they
Right.
will just, this it will be this they will be destroyed, so they have to build that lie which make their pain less. But then the thing
Yeah.
is, if they end up truly believing that lie many years after, then they may very well, which I think happens often, repeat it with their own children. So rape their own
Right.
children, because at this point they have conditioned themselves that maybe this is a reasonable way to express love. So it's like, well, my dad expressed love to me when I was a child by raping me, and you cannot say my dad was horrible. You see, it's like, because that will
Right.
break all the lie that you have built, and then you will
Yeah.
suddenly realize, oh my god, my dad
Yeah.
hated me, or at least didn't care about me. And so now
Right.
you live in this kind of comfortable lie that yes, your parents were not that bad. Maybe
Yeah.
that was just their way to express love. And so you may end up repeating it because of this story. So the conditioning could be so strong that you truly believe that, yes, it's just a form of love. So why not do it to my own children? So it's potentially
Uh,
dangerous also not to resolve the trauma, because I think this is very common, that
yeah.
the repetition of trauma. So children that have been beaten up, they beat up their own children. Children that have been raped, they
Oh,
may very
yeah.
well rape again. Not always, yeah, but it can happen, I think.
No, it can happen. Yeah, for sure. I think that's true. I think if people haven't really had a chance to do any kind of self reflection, or, yeah, maybe they're like, they've never had been given the tools to kind of look at what happened to them uh, in a realistic way. Um, they're just unconscious of it all, and repeat it because, like you say, that was somehow how they managed, to they've detached from the actual experience, with whether it's by stories or by compartmentalizing in some way, and then they just repeat it.
I think now I kind of understand the mechanism, because before I was like, okay, let's say a children was raped by their parents, and that's a trauma when they are a children.
Of
Why would
course.
they do it again? What's the logic? Why would they feel the need to
Yeah.
repeat it? And it could be,
Yeah.
and I'm not sure, again, I'm not a psychologist, but it could be that it's because of the story they have to tell themselves to cope with the situation, to survive. They say, oh, that's just a way. Let's say, for example, the father is raping the child, so maybe the child could try to fight back and punch, but then that will make things even worse. So then the
Oh,
father will
yeah.
just hit them on the head or whatever. So then it's
Yeah.
better to actually just completely submit and allow the
Mm.
father to rape the child. And the child, while this is happening, saying, well, I better not react, because at the end, he's just expressing love rather than fight back. And then it's going to be even more painful. But
Yeah.
over
Well, yeah.
time, this story becomes so ingrained in the mind, especially because it happens at a young age, that it just becomes their new reality. And then maybe when they have
Mm.
children, they're like, oh, look, maybe I should express love to that child by raping him. So maybe
Right.
actually it's very important to address those trauma
Yeah.
and to realize that those stories have been built exclusively to cope with the pain, but they are not real,
Mm.
rather than keep the story
Yeah.
and then repeat the behavior.
Yeah, no, no, it's very true. I think it is very important, particularly if it's been a really awful trauma like that, to, yeah, whatever you do, don't repeat it. So, yeah, if you're still kind of in denial about how painful or how damaging someone else's actions were towards you, you might, yeah, you might have replaced it with love or attention in your mind, and you might well repeat it. With your own child or with someone else.
It's almost a way to
Um,
validate your story. So it's like by repeating it, you, because I think a lot of people, they
yeah,
want to believe that their parents were good and their parents loved
yeah.
them. So in some
Well,
way,
yeah,
by themselves, let's
yeah,
say raping a child, they are like, that's the proof that it's true that my parents were good because I'm also good. And I'm doing
right.
it for the good of the child. They were doing it for my good. So you almost kind of get attached to the story, because the story is your protection of your denial. So you are denying the fact that your parents
Yeah,
were bad and you had to suffer because of them, by
yeah, yeah,
saying, no,
yeah,
it's no big deal. They do it for my own good. But you really
yeah,
cherish this story, and maybe you even want to do crazy stuff just to validate this
mm.
story that it is true, it's like that. So you are going to yourself repeat the same thing to protect the story. Almost could be, I mean, I'm not sure if it's the case, but it could be that you could do anything just to protect that story.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. But I think that does happen, and I think even in less dramatic examples than that, um, children. For children, it's very dangerous to. Admit to themselves that they're even angry with their parents, or that they're upset with their parents, because they want to preserve the idea that this parent is their caregiver. So it's like you can make almost any excuse. And children do. They often blame themselves, actually,
Mm.
for parental, any kind of abuse or neglect. They would rather blame themselves than blame the caregiver, because the caregiver is their life. At some point they are totally, well, certainly as a baby, say, or as a toddler, you're totally dependent
Yes.
on this caregiver being good to you, or not, as the case may be. You're completely at their mercy, as it were. And so yeah, you'd rather have a story of you being bad than they.
Maybe it also
um,
gives you a false sense of control. So if it's you that is bad, you could always change it.
yeah,
But if your parents are
right.
bad, you have no control. So maybe
Oh,
you
that's a good
rather
point.
believe
Yeah.
that you have control than you have no control.
Yeah, I know. Maybe that's true. Yeah, that's a good. I'd never thought of that, but that could be another angle on it. I mean, like you, I'm not a psychologist, but I think that there's all sorts of mechanisms that go on to defend, you know, against the reality of whatever's happened to us. If it's very threatening or horrible or unpleasant, damaging. In a funny sort of way, we're so robust as human beings, aren't we? Often in terms of how we build these defenses, but I guess that those very defenses can cause trouble if you're trying to unravel um, illusory defenses. And that's where sometimes the trauma thing can break through, because it's like you're unpacking the defense, you're taking away the shields, right?
Yes, yes.
Whether
So
that's
basically, when you
bullshit
go through the
stories.
fetters,
Yeah,
because the shield of the trauma is a story, when you go
could be. Yeah,
through the fetters, you remove the story and you realize that, and the thing comes out because you realize that actually, yes, your parents were assholes. And it's not that they loved you by hitting you or raping you or
right.
whatever. But the thing is, you have to remove that story in order to go ahead to progress through the fetters, because that's what it's about. So it's about
Yeah,
removing the illusions, the fetters. It's just that this is an illusion that you yourself created with a
yeah,
purpose that
yeah, yeah.
was useful at the time because
Oh
it
yeah,
helped you to survive, but now it's useless. But once you remove,
yeah,
suddenly all the pain will come out, because basically you have to go through the realization that your parent didn't do it out of love. They did it out of the fact that they were just horrible parents.
yeah. Or just they obviously hadn't looked at their own, whatever their trauma was. Often it's repeated, like you say, isn't
And
it?
it may
And
even be a
so
repetition on their part, yes.
it may even be a repetition. So it may, what is horrible, what is bad, what is good. It's like learned responses of one kind or another, isn't it? Of um, and inflicting what caused us pain often onto other people, or to try and make themselves feel better, make their child feel like shit. I mean, all these kind of projective things
You
go
mean
on
without
where
a
you
pre-existing story of a pre-existing trauma? So let's say some guy is
right.
frustrated at his work because his boss is a pain. So he will kind of release steam, like let steam off by, let's say, being like hitting his child or something like this.
Or yeah, or his wife, or yeah, that can happen, can't it, as well? Yeah, this sort of
Mm.
deflection of aggression. But it's a good idea, basically, if you can address as much of this, whatever trauma that you're aware of, before you get to the dropping of fetter 8, which is the last real illusion to do with I am, of having some kind of separate stage subjective experience. Because that's the other, after, often people get trauma come up as part of fetter desire and ill will 4 and 5. But the other place it can come up often for people is after fetter 8 falls, or when it's falling. And that's because yeah, with fetter 8, you can no longer create boundaries or a separate stage for experiencing life.
Hmm.
Um, you don't have, you lose the bubble where you separate what's me and what's not me. Uh, and you lose interiority versus exteriority, having a separate stage where your experience is happening, or where you have a certain perspective on experience, right? And I don't exactly know how it works, but it's as if people lose the ability to compartmentalize or detach from painful or blocked
Well, but I will say, I
emotional,
mean, this is just a
physical
theory that
phenomena.
I'm saying now. I will say that
Yeah,
maybe the reason is because the way they can compartmentalize is because of a story. So they build a story that allows to compartmentalize. And once the
right.
stories drop, then it just doesn't work. Because of course the
You could be.
compartmentalization is
Yeah.
artificial. It's not real.
No, it's not real, but I think it's the final compartmentalization is that there is a me actually separate from all experience, yeah? And it's as if you have an interior place like you can go to for refuge, against the vicissitudes of life, maybe, but also against you can kind of build separate stages for different parts of it. I don't know how this works really, but when Theta
Yes,
8
yes.
goes, it's like anything can come up at any time. This is how people describe it and how I experienced it actually. Um, and there's no defense against it anymore. So you better be kind of pretty stable or robust by the point you get to Theta 8,
I
because
see, I see, I
if
see.
you because otherwise you can really be thrown at that state. I mean, there's also a lot of energetic stuff that can go on, like kundalini energy suddenly being activated for people, um, which is actually a good
Do you
sign
believe in
because
that,
it's
in this stuff, Kundalini?
well, I didn't believe in it at all, but I actually had the experience. I didn't even
Ah,
believe in I never sought out Kundalini stuff or tantric experience, Tibetan Buddhist sort of experience. I wasn't a yoga person. Um, but after Theta 8 fell, I did one thing I got was some trauma coming up that I'd never processed, and I had to process
ah.
it, and I could. But another thing that came up was like 2 months of Kundalini mayhem, of energy just suddenly going wild. And
But what does that mean? How does that manifest energy? What does energy even mean? I mean,
well, yeah, exactly. I mean, I experienced it like uh, vibration, energy,
but what's
like
so
being
you're
lift.
shaking? What is vibration?
Well, vibration. I mean, it's not like I don't think I was visibly shaking, but it was as if it was the sensation of um, energy moving through the body,
Like
and
a
and
real
and get
feeling in your in your hands, in your
yeah,
body, as
yeah,
if there
a
is
real
some kind of
feeling.
energy going through.
Yes, like being, I can liken it to sort of feeling like a bit like a tree trunk, with the sap going through it. It's like
Mm,
I could, it wasn't like, uh, the normal sensations that we feel, a touch a table, that's a hard sensation. It wasn't real in that sense, as in, but it was real in terms of, I could feel it all the time.
all the time
And I
for
could
like 2 months. You said,
for 2 months, and I could even
and then
feel chakras. Where the energy was more blocked. In these Eastern meridian systems, you have
mm,
the chakras,
mm,
the base chakra, the various chakras. The heart chakra, the throat chakra, the final one.
mm,
And I definitely experienced that I had a block in the base chakra, and it was determined, whatever it is, to break through. And
mm.
I eventually, I actually thought I was going a bit mad at this point. It was so strange. I'd never had anything like it. Um, and yeah, and I try and do all these things, like do a bit of qigong. Do you know qigong
I
exercises,
heard of
which
it.
are
Yeah, like the mom of
yeah,
a good friend of mine at school was a teacher of qigong.
yeah. I mean, usually it's a very grounding, lovely thing to do. It can help balance your energies and whatever. So I tried qigong, for example, and found it just sent me absolutely crazy with energy, too much energy.
Mm.
Um, I had to talk to. In the end, I did find some support from people this had happened to as well. Christiana Mickelberger was really helpful to me then, because she had almost an identical experience as me,
Mm.
and so she could like tell me what to do and what would help and what wouldn't help, and it did pass. But it largely passed for me by going into the next feta, which was feta 9, which is dealing with
Ah,
directly with restlessness, and it's like it provided a focus or channel whereby I could continue and calm it. It naturally calmed that stuff. So
but I will
um
say, and this is kind of like a parenthesis, and it may be a little bit unrelated to the topic of trauma, which
yeah,
anyway I think we have
yeah.
finished addressing maybe. So
Yeah,
it's
maybe.
interesting because the stuff you just said, like Kundalini, chakra, Qigong, and feeling the energy,
Yeah,
it's usually this is considered like bullshit by most people, or like just
yeah, I know.
empty belief and whatever. And it's
Right.
interesting because we have been discussing something, I mean, which I call post-enlightenment. And now in my videos, I've kind of changed it. I call it like more hypothesis. So the idea that after you have removed all, let's say, the beliefs or the fetters,
Yeah.
then you can start, you have made, what's called a tabula rasa in Italian. It means like, tabula rasa means you clean everything. So it's like there is you have a table. So instead of you have a message, so you just throw away everything, you clean the table, and then you
Mm-hmm.
start building again. So this idea that enlightenment is not the end, but it's actually the beginning. So it's like first you have a lot of nonsense in your mind, like stories,
Yeah.
whatever. You
Yeah.
clean up everything, and then you start to
Mm-hmm.
build something, but always remembering that it's an hypothesis, that you want to validate it with maybe experience if you can, or at least it should
Mm-hmm.
not contradict itself. And you can start to build stuff. But it's interesting because you see, often when we speak, you say, well, it's just, you say it's just experience. But in some way, even you are telling me now that there is some invisible stuff also in this experience. So it's like, because if someone had told
Yeah.
you about Kundalini or chakra or whatever, without you having experienced it, you would have said, this is just bullshit. It's just a belief.
Yeah.
But then you
Yeah.
experience it and you say, well, no, it's true. So it's
Okay.
not
Yeah.
really that enlightenment. I mean, I think enlightenment is important because it leads to removing the beliefs that are based on nothing. So it's like
Yeah.
Santa
And that
Claus. So
cause
you
suffering.
remove, and that
Yeah.
cause suffering. A good point. And so all the nonsensical beliefs that are based on nothing and cause suffering. So you remove those, and then you have this clean table. But once you have this
Mm.
the clean table, I don't think it's over. I think then you can start to think about what is hidden. Because yes, of course, there is experience intended as
Mm-hmm.
what you see with your senses, but there is probably there may very well be some invisible reality. I mean, it's not that everything is visible to our eyes, and we don't have to go into fancy spiritual stuff. Like think about X-ray. So it's like,
Right.
if they had not invented the X-ray machine, maybe you will say
Mm-hmm.
like bones. That's just bullshit. I mean, I'm exaggerating because of course you could
Right.
see dead people and they rot and you see the bones.
Yeah.
But imagine like
Yeah.
today you do an X-ray of your and you see your bones, but maybe someone will say, bones, what is this nonsense? What is bones? It's not true. They don't exist.
Yeah.
Because so I think the this reductionist idea to say that
Mm-hmm.
experience, like, I mean, I am sure I'm not using the I'm going to quote the thing you say, like, in the scene, just the scene, like simply the scene. Or
Right.
I'm sure
Yes.
maybe it has a deeper meaning and whatever, but at first impact, it really sounds like reality is just whatever you perceive, period, and there is nothing
Ah,
invisible to it.
no.
That's how I perceive it.
No, no, no. I actually think that's a misconception. But we've been around that one before, haven't we? I understand why why you could think of it in this reductionist, why you could think it is reductionist, like just reducing things to what can be directly observed and so on. But it's not. That's kind of not the point. It's more that you're no longer adding the bullshit on top of it, which is what you'd said before.
Yeah,
Um,
but you may still
but
be
it's
adding hypotheses that maybe are true. So
yes,
let's say, maybe, I mean, for example, you are telling me about Kundalini and chakra. Now, this is something I've never
yeah,
experienced, and I was surprised. I was like,
no,
what are you talking about? I always
yeah,
thought
right.
that it was complete bullshit, you know. But
Well,
then
so
you
did
say that,
I. That's the thing.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. But now you experience it, you see. And now the thing is, so I have to think. So either you're lying to me, but
yeah,
you have no
right.
motivation. Why? Because what difference does it make to you? Why would you lie? Like, you have no incentive to lie. And there
No,
are plenty of people that have said that this thing is real, and they have no incentive to lie. I mean, some
no,
scammers maybe will say they will clean or whatever, and maybe some can really
yeah,
do and some cannot, and you don't know, you know.
no,
But the point is, I mean, why would you lie? And it's like, and maybe, and those ideas have been there for like thousands of years also. So why
that's
would
true.
people make up this?
Yeah,
It's like, so
yeah,
it's, I mean, I'm not saying we should take it for granted, but we should accept the possibility that maybe it's true. Kind of
yeah, yeah,
suspend judgment and keep an open mind. So for you, you
yeah.
experience it directly, so it's good. For me, I didn't, but I have to say, okay, Maria say it's true. She has no incentive to lie to me. Plus, I know other people that believe it's true.
No,
I know other people
no,
that say that they've experienced it. So maybe it can be true. Now, I will not, of course, say it is
yeah,
true for sure, but I could say maybe it
no,
is true, and then I will start to observe if it's
yeah,
coherent with other things. So let's say, Because of course, if it makes no sense, then it's a problem. But like imagine that you invent some kind of machine, like let's say X-ray machine,
Mm,
and but it's kind of not the real X-ray. It's like let's say a bullshit X-ray machine. And so you take an
mhm.
X-ray of someone, and it show like there is a small octopus in their chest. It's an example, yeah. And so,
Right.
but when that person dies, you open and there is no such small octopus. And so you're like, well, then this machine is bullshit. You say, but let's say normal X-ray, you do X-ray, you see bones. That person dies, you open the corpse, you see bones. Ah, so the machine was right. But before the person died, you could not know for sure because you cannot open the person while they are alive to see if there are bones. So you kind of trust that there is a certain chance that the X-ray is real.
Mm,
So you are
yeah.
saying that Kundalini and chakra is real. I know many people that say that it's real too. I've never experienced it,
Mhm.
but those people, they have no reason to lie. So I have to accept the
Right.
possibility that maybe it's real, so that maybe there are things that are real and I just cannot see and cannot experience, but that doesn't mean they are false. But I think it's very important that this process should start after enlightenment. So if not, it becomes some kind of magic bullshit where
Right.
you mix
Yeah.
fantasy and stuff. So it's like you
Yeah.
have to, I think you really have to clean up the table, erase all
Yeah.
the nonsensical beliefs, and then you can start to add the hypotheses and see if they are matched or not, if they are coherent
Yeah.
or not, etc., etc. Because if you don't do the removal process first and you just start adding this stuff, then it's like, oh, then I am my chakra. You are just going to mix
Yeah.
the story with those hypotheses, which those might be real, but you will mix them with bullshit. So it's like, oh yes, so this
Yeah.
is the will of the chakra, or I am my
Right.
chakras, or you know,
Yeah.
so
Correct. Yeah.
that, or
Yeah.
I
Yeah. No,
deserve
it's a
my
good point.
because of this chakra I deserve that. So I think it's extremely important. I think this post enlightenment kind of exists, even if of course it's a construct. It's just an idea. I mean, it's a concept, of course, but it's the idea that you do enlightenment first, you remove all the bullshit, but then you're not done. Then you can start build hypotheses, like for example,
Mhm.
chakra, kundalini, whatever. You can experiment. You can talk about
Mhm.
it with other people. You
Mhm.
can see if it's coherent, if it makes sense.
Well, you're not gonna put lots of meaning onto it in a particular way that you would before enlightenment. Then you wouldn't see it as a spiritual path in itself or anything like that. You
It's
wouldn't
just a
be. I
thing,
think
but it's a
that
thing you cannot see.
yeah,
So it's still interesting. There is still a difference because it's a
in the
thing
scene
you
or in the
cannot
scene.
see. So before,
Yeah.
so it's not that because with before enlightenment there is plenty of bullshit. After immediately
Yeah.
after enlightenment, someone may be tempted to say there is only what I see, nothing else. But then you may say, wait, but why
Right.
should that be the case? There is what I see,
Right.
but there may very well be other stuff that I don't see.
Yeah, I think the punchline in that only the scene, as the Buddha was, there is no me in any of it. I think that was the main point. It's not that things can be known, necessarily. Only it's not that you can trust your own perception either necessarily, because we know that we project a lot of our own. We make a lot of it up, don't we? We construct mentally perspective and all sorts of things. So it's not like talking about it's talking about experience minus the belief, minus the illusion that there's a self internal to all the experience, or there's a like essential nature in everything that is seen, or something like that. It's removing the bullshit of self, really. But it doesn't mean that you're going to know everything, or quite the opposite, actually, or that everything is known to you. I mean, I still don't. It's a mystery to me, really, what happened with that Kundalini experience, for example, or chakras. I mean, I've had minor experience that's similar, but nothing quite like that particular experience. And I still don't really understand what happened.
Yeah. For me, it's like when I was doing the training with you, my feeling was that, and maybe I was wrong, yeah, in my understanding, but that the direction you were pushing is like there is nothing outside your perception. So like almost like saying perception is
Right.
reality, So
Right. Oh,
so
no. No, no.
it's just experience. This thing is just experience. So
Yeah.
like perception is experience. There is nothing else but experience. But I was like, but why? There may very well be stuff that is invisible to
Yeah.
you that is real. Of course, there is a lot of stuff that is not real, that is bullshit. Those are stories that have to be removed. But there may very well be things that are invisible and are real.
Well, for sure. For sure.
It's
That's
just
true.
hard to figure what they are.
Yes, it's hard to figure what they are. I think it was just, it is a bit of a reductionist process to go through the fetters, because you are literally trying to chuck out something that's you've taken on board as real all your life, and you're trying to basically see through that it's, if it is bullshit, that it is bullshit, right? And so it is a bit of a process of elimination, first and foremost, when you're
In the
going through that
initial phase
process
of the
of,
unfettering, yes.
yeah, you have to take off what's nonsense and what's story and what's, an assumption, or you have to rather not take off. It's not like you acquire a new set of beliefs. It's like you have to challenge each belief that you have and see whether it holds up to,
Yes, correct, correct, correct. And I would say in the
reality.
second phase, in the post-enlightenment phase, let's say, or the what we can call the hypothesis phase, where you have done this cleaning of the table, you have removed everything that is nonsense, and now you are building from scratch with solid foundation. With
Mm,
hypothesis, I think the key difference is that you never have any attachment to your hypothesis. So it's like, let's say now you are telling me about this Kundalini stuff, but let's say that tomorrow, let's say you go to a doctor and you realize that you have some problem in your nervous system, and it gives
right.
you this feeling of
Yeah.
electric shock. Ah, so that was it. That was, there was no Kundalini. It was just an issue with my nervous system. And that's actually a much more plausible explanation. So if, let's say, you
Yeah.
had this feeling of energy all over your body and you cannot
Yeah.
explain it, well, now you may think it's Kundalini, but let's say in 5 years from now, they are going to diagnose you a disease to the nervous system.
Yeah.
And they say, yeah, this is typical symptom that it actually starts. This is the typical symptom that you have this feeling of energy for 2 months, and then that's this the beginning of this disease, you know. Then you will say, ah,
Yeah.
so that
Yeah. Yeah.
Kundalini thing was bullshit. It was just
I'm
this.
laughing. I'm laughing because my first response when I had this thing was that it was a neurological problem, and I was talking to a friend of mine who's a doctor, and
Uh-huh.
trying to get a diagnosis. I was trying to get a scientific diagnosis, but because I was trying to work out what the hell could be causing this, because physically, because I assumed there was actually a physical cause, and somehow like an aberration, an illness, a disease, but yeah.
So you did all the
Um,
tests, all the medical tests.
no, I can't say I did that. I didn't get round to doing that. Not yet. I hadn't yet done that, but I had ruled out. I managed to, just by talking to people who are scientifically or medically trained, I managed to eliminate quite a few things, and it was
So
just
by
very
discussing the
confusing.
symptom, they basically excluded
Yeah.
that you had any neurological disease.
Well, in that, yes. I mean, as it happens,
And
I do. I do have
how
some.
long ago was that you had this feeling of Kundalini thing?
Um. Oh, it must have been around 2017. So it's about
7 years ago. So I guess if it
eight
was
years
a
ago. Yeah.
neurological disease, by now it should have degenerated into something much
Yeah,
worse.
into something
Because
much
usually those are
worse.
always degenerative. So I think neurological diseases are almost always degenerative. So they only get worse with time. So if nothing
Right.
happened to you, then probably it's not. So it's interesting. So it's probably not
Yeah.
a neurological disease. So maybe there is some truth to this Kundalini thing after all. But I think the
Yeah.
key is that there is no attachment to it. So if you add any element of evidence that tell you that it was a neurological disease, then you will say, okay, then no Kundalini. The chakra, I don't know, let's say
Right.
that you feel your throat chakra and you think it's
Yeah.
blocked,
Yeah.
but then you realize
Yeah.
that you had some abnormality in your, maybe like some, or not hormones, or like not
Thyroid.
thyroid, yeah, maybe something around here that, or the thing in the
Yeah.
throat is the tonsil, I think it's called. Maybe something grows too
Yeah.
much and then they have to remove it, and now you don't feel it. It's like, well, that was just this. But again, if you did an MRI and
Yeah.
X-ray and everything, and was nothing in your throat, then maybe it's
Yeah.
real. I think it's important also to be able
Yeah.
to not reach conclusion, to say it may be real, it may not be. It's not that you have to force
Mm.
yourself to reach a conclusion. It must, either it's true or it's
No.
false. It's like you can live in a realm of possibilities. Like, yeah, maybe there is
Yeah.
Kundalini, looks like there is, but maybe there isn't. Maybe there is chakra, but maybe there isn't. It's like you can very well live in a world of probabilities where you're
Sure.
slowly trying to assess what is the probability, and over time you end up assessing the probability.
I think so. I think what you say is important, actually, about that you hold loose to you can hold, you can be aware that you might have theories or assumptions even, but if you can hold loose to them and to the possibility that they may not be true or they may be true, I think that's very important, because I think I mean, that's one of the things I noticed unfettering, and other for other people as well, is that you you're challenging dearly held assumptions, and it's like your belief system is part of your security system.
It's
Um,
part of your
and so
identity in some way. So, but
it's
that
part of your
goes,
identity,
yeah.
yeah. And that goes, and so it's interesting. Most people do find that they can, after going through the unfettering process, they may still have their views and beliefs, political, whatever, but they usually hold them a lot lighter because they are aware that they're not um, anymore, determined to hang on to, my particular thoughts about. It's not. They know that that's just thoughts and views and conditioning that's created particular um, ways of looking at the world, ways of
Yes.
approaching the world, rather than you know hanging on to what's true, what's not true in a particular way. You know.
Yeah, it's much better to think in probability. So it's like, like let's say God, instead of saying God exists, God doesn't exist, and then making wars and killing each other, just say maybe he exists, maybe he
Oh
doesn't.
yeah,
But I mean, why do you
yeah.
have to draw a conclusion? It's much more interesting to live in a world of probabilities and look for facts that either confirm or disconfirm something. And you can very well spend your whole life, and sometimes you find a fact that confirms, one that disconfirm, another that confirm, another that disconfirm, etc., etc.
I think if you can hang loose and experiment in that way, and that you're, describing, really, it could be fun to engage with life. It's not that you have to withdraw from life because you've removed the illusions. You can actually engage in a much more,
It becomes almost
uh,
like an exploratory process rather than
yeah,
something that is about you. You have to fight for it. You have to defend your ideas. It's just an
yeah.
exploratory process. You're just exploring.
I think it's more truly creative for that reason, because because it is without an agenda, which is needing to be proven.
That's a very good point, because if you set the agenda, which is the end goal, the ultimate direction, it's not an
Mhm.
exploratory process at all. You're just trying to find
No,
any possible way to reach that goal. So, by definition, in order for it to be an exploratory process, you shouldn't have set the destination. So, you must be completely open minded. So, maybe God exists and you will find it, or maybe it does not exist
mm,
and you will not find it, but you're completely open to both possibilities. So, it's true
yeah.
exploration. But if you have already decided that it should exist or it should not exist, this is not exploration. You're just going to find stuff to validate your initial theory, and that's it.
No, it's very true. It's funny because I'd never believed. I actually brought up with religious beliefs, Catholic religious beliefs as well. But I'd talking about belief in God. I'd rejected a belief in God when I was about 13, um, for various reasons, and then I became a Buddhist, or at least an atheist. I didn't believe in God. Um, but I had again through in Feta 8, I had this experience of such beautiful experience, I suppose, that I thought, oh, I know what people mean about be feeling one with God. I could
Mm,
for the very first time, I could imagine why people would end up with a belief in God. Actually,
yes. But I think the
um,
issue with God is also that we will first have to define what exactly is God. Because if you say God is
right,
an old man sitting on a throne in the sky with a long beard,
with a beard,
then of
yeah,
course, I mean, that's something. But if someone say God is some kind of energy that permeates all the universe, I mean, why not? So the issue with God is you first have to define what you mean by God,
by
and
God,
then you
yeah,
can start,
true,
because God could really be so many things. It's like, because if you say,
right,
let's say a bottle, okay, a bottle, we can discuss if there is a bottle or not on this chair. But let's say I say energy. Now, energy could
mm,
be, it's such a broad word. So, is there energy on that table? Well, maybe there is some kind of
hmm,
invisible energy. Maybe there is no energy. I mean, we have no idea. Turn out that
right,
inside a single atom, there is plenty of energy. So,
yeah.
I mean, I guess the issue with God is really the fact that you really have to first define what you mean by God. Because if you have a very strict definition that is very reductive, like let's say, is an old
Well,
man
that's
sitting on a
true.
chair,
Yeah,
then
yeah,
yes,
yeah.
okay, fine. But
No,
you
it's
may have
true.
a
People have
completely different
very.
definition.
That's true. People, I know it's true. Actually, maybe that wasn't the best example to use in that fact, because every religion almost has a different definition of God, and then individuals. I mean, what do people mean by that? They can mean very different things, as you say. So maybe that wasn't
But
such a
because
good
I think in
example.
this case, you said you had this feeling of unity with God. But I mean, maybe it
Yeah,
was not with God. Maybe you just had a feeling of unity. It's like, why
Exactly.
does it have to be with God? It's like maybe it's just a feeling of unity with
Yeah.
the universe.
Well,
But maybe God
yeah.
and the universe is the same thing. Maybe God is the universe. Who knows? I mean, it's just a
Yeah.
synonym.
Well, yeah. I mean, the very fact was it was the last vestiges of, me and something else. And so it's like I
Mm.
expanded consciousness to include, it was very beautiful in a way, but it was still subtly dualistic, me and something else,
Because there is still the you feeling connected. So it's not just the
with something else.
everything. It's you
Yeah.
connected with something
Yeah.
else. So there is still a distinction between the you and the something else. I see.
There's still a subtle dualism there. Even if you say I am one with something else, I am
Yeah, yeah,
one with.
because you are still not it. You are you and
Yeah.
you're feeling united with that thing.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
a merging of something or whatever.
Which
Yeah.
imply a
Yeah.
previous separation. If there is a
Exactly.
merging, it implies a previous separation. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah.